All right, today we're going to jump back in time. We're diving into the world of cartoonist WH Bonney and his book, Official Comics. And this is a journey that's not just about humor, but about the sheer, painstaking craft of creating comics before computers took over.
So to really get a feel for this world, let's just listen to a bit of the dialogue. It's the kind of thing you could totally imagine hearing on a college campus back in the 70s. Just, turned up to 11.
And there you have it. That one line is just perfect. It completely captures that satirical, super self-aware tone of the time, using this high-level psychological term just to call someone a dumbhead. It's this unique voice that makes these comics so cool. So let's start at the very beginning of the artist's journey.
Okay, so our story kicks off, as a lot of these do, in an elementary school classroom in the 1960s. But for a young W.H. Bonney, this wasn't really a place for quiet learning. Nope, it was his first canvas for a little bit of rebellion. You gotta remember, this was way before fancy art supplies. He was just being resourceful. Bonney would just grab the daily paper, find some super serious-looking politician, and draw a totally ridiculous word balloon over his head with a ballpoint pen. His magnum opus at the time was a daily series about the jungle goat, a not-so-sly nod to his teacher. And tragically, not a single one of these masterpieces survived.
So fast forward to high school, and the whole vibe of the country is shifting. Big time. The underground press is just exploding with these wild new ideas and, most importantly for him, comics that were absolutely nothing like what you'd find in the mainstream newspapers. And Bonney wanted in on that.
So he did it. He published his own little 8-page paper, full of anti-war essays and his own cartoons, all printed with that classic, kind of weird-smelling purple Ditto ink. It had a print run of exactly one issue before he got hauled into the principal's office. And that's when he was hit with the ultimate threat. This little stunt could end up on his permanent record, totally derailing his entire future.
Well, luckily for him, that whole dreaded permanent record thing never quite made it to Tufts University. Bonney got in back in 1971, and it was there, in his little apartment in Somerville, Massachusetts, that his cartooning really started to get serious. This is where he leveled up from just a high school rebel to a dedicated artist.
And the timing was just perfect. You had Gary Trudeau over at Yale creating what would become the legendary Doonesbury, basically setting the bar for college comics. But Bonney's real hero, his true north, was the underground legend Robert Crumb. Bonney's goal was actually pretty humble. He thought if he could just get to 10% of Crumb's skill level, that would be a huge win. And hitting that 10%, that was a massive undertaking. We really have to wrap our heads around the sheer physical work involved here. This was a pre-pixel world, people. No computers, no fancy drawing tablets, and honestly, the most terrifying part, no undo button. Every single line you put down with that crow-quill pen and ink was there for good.
But if there was one true villain in this whole story, it was this stuff called Zipatone. It was what you had to use to get shades of gray on cheap newsprint. It was this thin, sticky plastic sheet covered in tiny black dots, and for cartoonists back then, trying to apply it was an absolute waking nightmare.
I mean, the whole process was just agonizing. You'd lay this sticky film down, and then you'd have to very carefully trim away every little bit you didn't want with a razor-sharp X-Acto knife. One little piece of dust trapped underneath, one tiny wrinkle, one slip of the blade, and hours of work could be completely ruined. It was just this super high-stakes, stressful part of making every single panel. Just to put that into perspective, the modern alternative to that entire painstaking, sometimes finger-slicing process is just holding down the command key and hitting Z. The difference is absolutely staggering. Okay, so after college, Bonney graduates into the so-called real world, a thing that kind of filled students back then with a lot of dread. He ends up with a job in a postcard factory, which, in this really weird twist of fate, is what would connect him back to his artistic hero.
So while he's working at this factory, he decides, you know what? I'm going to take a shot. Robert Crumb was running a magazine called Weirdo that showcased cartoonists he liked. Bahardi sent in one of his own strips, one that was inspired by a Woody Guthrie biography he'd been reading. A few months go by, and a letter shows up. It's from Crumb himself. So, what did it say? Was this his big break?
Well, technically it was a rejection, but it was so much more than that. Crumb sent back a handwritten note complimenting the art, specifically mentioning a character named Uncle Cantaloupe, and even asked about the very same book that inspired the comic in the first place. I mean, this personal, thoughtful rejection from his idol, that was way more validating than a simple acceptance letter ever could have been.
So that personal validation was obviously huge. But years down the road, a completely different kind of validation showed up. And this time, it was from a massive, totally mainstream source.
In 1996, that's 17 years after he first drew it, a version of one of his cartoons showed up in Parade magazine. It reached an audience of 40 million people. 40 million. He jokes that even after shaking the magazine and sending what he calls increasingly strident letters, a royalty check never did fall out. It was just another strange, funny milestone on this comic's very long journey.
But the story doesn't just end there. When you look back at official comics now, it's become way more than just a collection of gags. It's a cultural time capsule, preserving all the anxieties and quirks of its time.
You know, the comics are a perfect snapshot of the specific fears people had back then. There's a 1975 strip that shows these post-apocalyptic earthworms living in a world destroyed by nuclear war. That was the big fear of that decade. Bonney points out that if he drew it today, the apocalypse would for sure be caused by climate change. It's amazing, right? The source of our collective dread evolves, but the feeling itself kind of stays the same.
I mean, these strips are practically historical documents at this point. The beetle nut conspiracy captures the once common sight of red beetle nut splats on sidewalks in India. Another one shows a professor trying to teach computer code to students who can only understand it by comparing it to really primitive video games. They're just these perfect little snapshots of a moment in time.
And it's super important to remember, this satire wasn't happening in a bubble. The Tufts newspaper, where these comics first ran, also published really thoughtful, serious political content. So you had these real-world issues being tackled right alongside Bonney's absurd, funny animals.
Which really just leaves us with a final question to chew on. As you look at these comics from a totally different era, it's worth thinking about what satire really is. How much of all that absurdity was just going for a quick laugh, and how much of it was a really clever commentary on the anxieties of the time, all disguised as a simple comic strip. It's definitely something to think about.